Let's talk about pickles, specifically homemade ones. You see, I don't have a garden, nor do I know anything about canning, but I do know one or two things thanks to one of my favorite YouTubers, OurHalfAcreHomestead, also known as the Mrs. Volfie. I've been watching Mrs. Volfie for about, I don't know, 6 years or so. I started watching her because my sister watched her, and I feel like now I'm a bigger fan than my sister is. But I keep watching. I love her videos. I love her live streams. Mrs. Volfie, if you're watching this, I love you. Now, let's talk about pickles. I know nothing about canning, and I know nothing about gardening. I don't have a garden, but I do know a thing or two. So, one of my coworkers gave me some vegetables from her garden, including these overripe yellow cucumbers. I had no idea what they were, neither did she. In fact, when she picked them, she was so surprised and she and her husband couldn't figure out what they were. Well, my aunt came over, and so I asked my aunt, who has a little more knowledge about these things, what are these huge yellow pickles? And she told me that those are for slippery jacks. Now, apparently this is some old-fashioned recipe that you use overripe yellow cucumbers for, and they have to be peeled before you make the pickles. So my aunt actually went ahead and found an old recipe from my uncle, her brother. So the recipe comes from some old magazine that my uncle had, that passed it to my aunt, that passed it to me, and now I'm making this recipe for you here on YouTube. Now, the recipe is for slippery jack pickles, and according to the recipe, they're also called Senfgurken. Must be the German name, I'm not sure. Now, because this is an old recipe, a lot of ideas about canning have changed over the years, about canning and food safety. So I would definitely consult like a canning book of some kind. I wouldn't just follow this recipe because it doesn't tell you to process the pickles at all. It just tells you to put the hot jars with the hot syrup and then seal all at once. After I talked to my sister and watched Mrs. Volfie's most recent bread and butter pickle video, I decided to process these pickles for 25 minutes, just to be on the safe side. The jars were hot, the syrup was hot, and everything was sterile, but you can never be too sure nowadays, and especially because I'm giving these to my coworker's family, I want to make sure that they're shelf stable and that they're going to seal properly and not cause any food safety issues. So here's how you make them. First, you start by peeling these huge yellow cucumbers, and then you chop them into spears. Now, because I was using pint jars, I actually had to chop them down into smaller pieces. If I was using bigger jars, I could have probably left them whole. You also need to scrape out the insides with a spoon, and these had a ton of water and seeds on the inside, so we went ahead and got rid of all of that, and then I chopped them into their proper pieces. And I'm also going to make some other pickles, sort of like a bread and butter style pickle with a different cucumber that she also gave me. That's not in the video here, but you'll see it when I'm doing the canning process. By the way, you need to soak these in cold water overnight and then drain them when you're ready to can the next day. So the syrup is really easy. It's just a mixture of white vinegar, sugar, and water. I'll put the recipe down below, and you just bring it to a boil. And then in the jars, I put a tablespoon of salt as well as a tablespoon of the pickling seasoning. It only called for a teaspoon, but I like things seasoned nice and well, so I went ahead and added extra pickling spice. In the recipe it called for mustard, but there was mustard seed in the pickling spice, so I just went ahead and used the pickling spice. With my clean, sterile jars and my boiling hot syrup, I went ahead and packed the jars pretty tightly, and I left about, half an inch to 1 inch from the top, and then I just poured the boiling syrup right over the pickles. And just like Mrs. Volfie taught me in all of her canning videos, I used a plastic utensil to debubble. Then always wipe the rim of your jars. Then put the hot lids on the jar and turn the ring until it's fingertip tight. Now, I've always been told by Mrs. Volfie not to boil the lids and the rings, so I just put them in I poured off some of the hot water from sterilizing my jars and just put them in the hot water. So it's like hot water off the kettle. And then I put them in just a regular stock pot. I don't have a canning pot or anything like that, but I put them right in the stock pot. I also don't have a rack. I know you're supposed to put them on a wire rack. I just went ahead and risked it. And I boil bath can them for about 25 minutes. So that's that. And this morning I opened up one of the jars. They were sealed perfectly. I opened up the bread and butter pickle jar and I put some of those homemade pickles, which also had jalapeno in them, on my BLT sandwich, which I didn't have any lettuce, so I used kale, and I didn't have any regular tomato, so I used yellow tomato. And that is what I had for breakfast this morning, and boy, was that ever good. So that was my little pickle adventure in home canning. Thank you, Dina, for providing me with some wonderful garden vegetables. Ironically, my camera is being held up by an enormous heirloom tomato that's ripening outside right now. So thank you so much. It's amazing if you have a garden to share your garden with people and then you can give back to them. I can't wait to share these pickles with Dina because she grew these in her garden and they were just kind of junk. They were just kind of laying around and now they've become something useful. So that's it, and good luck with pickling and trying canning, and thank you, Mrs. Volfie. I think I might be into canning now, so thank you very much for all of your inspiration over the years. Take care. Bye-bye.